So what I decided to do for this workshop was to focus in on some work that very specifically explores the relationship between rhythm in language and rhythm in other aspects of the culture and early language acquisition. So I'm a developmental psychologist. I study the foundations of language acquisition beginning in infancy. So we even do some stuff in utero. Before babies understand any words, before they're beginning to talk, and we look at how they break into language. So acquiring the native language, you probably have some sense that the major production milestones are babies start babbling. This is rhythmical as well, reduplicated babbling, ba, 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 ba. Enormous neuromuscular control to get that right. They're starting to do that by about 8 months. They're producing their first words. These are all averages by 10 to 12 months, mama, dog. They're combining words by about 18 months. Mama, go. Complex clauses and sentences are emerging by 2 to 3 years, and by 4 to 5 years they have embedded clauses, active sentences, passive sentences. It's remarkably rapid. Comprehension, so the listening aspect of it, or the watching if they're growing up with sign, begins much earlier, so they respond to their own name by 4 months. They recognize common words by 6 months. So if they're shown a picture of a hand and a picture of a foot, and you say hand, a 6-month-old infant, long before they're talking or that you realize they understand anything, will look more at the hand than the foot. They'll look more at mommy than her sister if you say whatever the word is for mommy in your family. So they're beginning to understand language very, very early. And much of my work is about is perceptual attunement. So how babies go from those universal listeners that they are at birth, ready to learn any language, ready to recognize any mother or father, to becoming specialists in their world. And they do this rapidly during infancy. Most of my work has been on speech sounds, but we're looking at rhythm a lot as well now. So perceptual attunement to the properties of the native language, including rhythm, are the first steps in allowing babies to acquire their native language. And this happens really fast. Starts in utero. You'll see this in a second. And at every step of the way, there's some organization. The preparation that's happening in utero has already come about not just from sort of genetically programmed maturation, but from some of the rhythmical events that happen, within the body in development. But we'll talk about the baby. So the roadmap, languages of the world differ in rhythm. I'm going to talk about that a bit. Infants use rhythm in language to aid in language acquisition, particularly grammar, syntax, word order. I'll introduce this concept of culture as a binder for language acquisition. So it's not just the properties of the native language that are allowing babies to acquire, to break into language, but also the broader properties of the culture in which the language is embedded. As Vladimir said, it's hard to take them apart. It's not, and you have to keep the whole in mind. And music and language share some aspects of rhythm. So the music of a culture shares some aspects with the language of a culture, particularly some musical genres and at some points in history. And infants can use the music of the culture to aid in language acquisition. So that's the roadmap. So first of all, prosodic bootstrapping is a concept we use. They use prosody to break into different aspects of language and a key role for rhythm. So yes, languages of the world have different vocabularies, different word orders, and different phonologies, so different sound systems. But at the acoustic level, and this is what's first available to the developing fetus and young infant, they also have different prosody. So the fundamental frequency and patterning, the frequency range and the patterning of frequency differ, and the rhythmical properties are different. And I'll go through this in more detail when it's relevant later. And infants use these prosodic patterns to distinguish one language from another. Yes, they can discriminate these languages at birth, and to bootstrap learning the properties of their native language. So using rhythm to distinguish language, we test this in newborns with a couple of techniques. One of them is behavioral, using that rhythmical sucking response. So babies actually suck in bursts and pauses. So, and you can you can condition the sucking reflex. So you can condition how strong the sucks are. So you can make it that every time baby gives a strong suck, they get to hear a sound. And you can actually even, I haven't done this one, condition the interburst interval. So it's really cool. So that's one technique that's been used. Another one is neuroimaging, and this is a technique here, FNIR is functional near-infrared spectroscopy, where you shine light on a baby's head, light in the frequency range that's absorbed by oxy and deoxyhemoglobin, and you can tell differences in activation in the brain by the relative differences in the absorption of light in those frequencies. So using both of these techniques, that's how we've shown, and we and others have shown that at birth, neonates discriminate languages from different rhythmical classes, and they also show a preference for the language heard in utero. So they'll suck more to hear the language that they heard in utero. And similarly, the brain responds differently to languages from different rhythmical classes, and more to the one heard in utero. And that Dutch and German is for if one of those languages is familiar, which is just like really cool too. Okay, and then bilingual exposed infants, I'm going to call them bilinguals. They don't have language yet, but I'm going to call them that, show a preference for both of their native languages over a language from an unfamiliar rhythmical class at birth, but they can distinguish their two familiar languages from one another. So already, by the time they're born, babies are responding differently to the language heard, or languages heard in utero, and if they heard two languages in utero and they can discriminate them from each other, they're already set up to start tracking separately the properties of each. So they do not confuse their languages. Okay, so I better get moving more quickly. Infants use prosody to bootstrap learning the properties of their native language. So I'm going to go through a couple of studies. So one is statistical bootstrapping of word order. So languages of the world differ in word order. So the most common are subject, verb, object, and subject, object, verb. English is a subject, verb, object language. The man threw the ball. And there are lots of languages that are subject, object, verb. The man, the ball threw. And there are differences then in the constituent phrases. So Japanese is subject, object, verb. English is verb, object. One of the differences in the constituent phrases is that in in VO languages like English, verb, object, the highly frequent words, like those determiners, come first. So the man threw the ball. I'm from Vancouver. Those function words are highly frequent. And in a language like Japanese, they come second. And babies can use that statistical difference to track the properties, to learn the word order. So I don't know if I should do this or not. I'll do it really quickly. Okay, so this is some work that was done by Judith Gervain that then later she came to my lab as a postdoc and that we built from. So she created a little artificial language to see if babies could indeed track frequency to segment. And she presented this little artificial language to babies who were growing up either in a subject-verb-object language or subject-object-verb. And remember, verb-object, frequent first, from Vancouver, object-verb language, frequent last, so like Tokyo Kara. So she just used frequency. And so this is the little artificial language she gave them. It ramped up slowly. Any syllables jump out for you? So some of you heard fils, gi. Yeah, and so you were pulling out a whole word or phrase. So some of those were frequent. So 3 of them were highly frequent, like a function word, and the other 9 were varying. And so the question is, did they pull out frequent first or frequent final? And so these are the test stimuli, things like they had the chance to, whenever a light came on one side after they'd been familiarized, they would hear this, a frequent first segment. Come on, play for me. Or when the light came on the other side, they'd hear frequent final. And she asked, which side did they look longer? Did they look longer when they heard frequent first? Did they keep looking to hear more? Or did they look longer when they heard frequent second? And they performed as a function of the word order that they were growing up in. So English learning babies preferred frequent first, Italian learning babies preferred frequent first, Japanese learning babies preferred frequent final. So they had used frequency. Great. What's that have to do with rhythm? Consider a baby growing up learning 2 languages with 2 different word orders. Frequency alone will not be informative, so can they use prosody? So this is a little baby whose dad speaks Japanese, his mom speaks English. So if he tries to use frequency, he's just going to get mixed up, because in English, frequent comes first, and in Japanese, frequent comes second. So what is he going to do? Well, it turns out that there are also prosodic properties that differ between languages that have different word orders. So I don't do this work, linguistic typologists do this work, and it's built on some basic auditory principles that are pretty much maintained in languages as well, when they talk about the iambic trochaic law. I'm calling it quotes because it's pretty much maintained. And so basically, listeners, including infants, naturally segment sequences differing in rhythm into short-long at the phrasal level. And so that's just something we do when we listen to rhythmical sequences. And if they differ in prominence, then, like in loudness and pitch, we sequence naturally. We can learn to overcome all of these into high-low. So louder and higher in pitch. And VO languages like English, where frequent comes first, so from Vancouver, are short-long. They have the difference in duration, primarily in the prosody. Of course, they have all the other differences as well, but that's the more dominant one. And OV languages, which that's supposed to be, sorry, I didn't correct this. That's supposed to be frequent final phrases, use prominence. So the more frequent word is second. And so, Tokyo Kara, so it's on a higher pitch. I said this one backwards for you. So the content word, the less frequent word, will be on a higher pitch. The frequent word is final. Is that clear? Sorry that there's that typo. Okay, there you see it illustrated again. So basically what we asked is, can bilingual infants who are growing up with languages with 2 different word orders, where frequency alone won't do it, can they use prosody on top of that to bootstrap word order? So what we did is we tested English learning babies who are growing up bilingual with English plus a language that had the opposite word order. And we used the same head-turn preference procedure. And so this time, rather than just giving them the frequency statistics, we either put duration on top of it or put pitch on top of it. So let me give you, I'll give you the frequent final first. So here's the pitch. I'm sorry. Or we gave them just the duration difference. So all we're looking at there is duration. And we tested these bilingual babies to see if they had been given the OV the prosody, would they have a preference for frequent second? And if they'd given the VO preference, prosody, would they have a preference for frequent first? And we tested them without any prosody. We used the same test words. So what had they learned, and what would they learn, what would they pull out now? And I'll just tell you you heard these already. So there's no prosody there. And what we found is that indeed, if they had been given the pitch differences, they went for frequent final. They pulled out infrequent, frequent, like Tokyo Kara, Tokyo from. And if they had been given the duration difference, they pulled out the verb-object word order and preferred frequent first. So like from Vancouver. So is that clear? So some of you. Okay. So we thought that was pretty cool. Okay. So they can use prosody to help learn 2 different word orders. So they're 8 months old. They're starting to understand some words. They're not doing 2-word productions or anything like that, but they're understanding some phrases. And by pulling out the word order, if it's frequent first, when they start talking, they're going to drop that determiner, and all they're going to say is that content word. And so it allows them to learn where in spoken language to look for the words that are going to carry meaning, those infrequent ones. Where should they listen for words that are going to carry primarily structure, those little function words, a, and, the, from, with. And that sets them, ultimately those words that carry meaning are the ones that are going to label things in the world. So this is an example of prosodic bootstrapping, breaking into language. Okay. Ready to move to the second one? So languages of the world also differ in speech sound inventories, and this is where I've done most of my research and do critical period work and stuff. And young infants discriminate minimally different speech sounds from across the world's languages. So think the most common example is ra-la. That is very uncommon. That's a very uncommon difference across the world's languages. And yes, it is difficult for Japanese speakers to discriminate and to produce. Lots and lots of languages don't have it. We as English speakers, and I've done a lot of my work on this, you can't hear the difference between da, da. They sound like da to you, but one is a dental D and one is a retroflex D, and that's as important of a difference in Hindi as ba, da is in English. And so by the time when they're little babies can discriminate these sound differences, all of them. And by the time they're about 10 months old, they've become specialists, and they're very good at discriminating the ones in their native language, and they get worse and worse at discriminating the ones that are not used in their native language. And I actually think this is when there's some work that shows that this is really important for word learning, because not maintaining the ability to discriminate non-native differences is really important. So if I'm trying to label doll for a little baby, and I say, oh, look at this doll. There's something called co-articulation. My tongue is pulled forward, and I produce that D like a dental D. I produce it behind my teeth, this doll. But if I say, oh, that's our doll, my tongue is pulled back by the R, and I produce a more retroflex like D. But in English, we have to collapse these, or they're going to think that doll is 2 different words. It's just one word. And so by stopping, so I wouldn't actually keep exposing them to that by declining in showing a decline in discrimination of this non-native distinction, they can more rapidly process the variation that occurs around pronunciation to learn a word. So, and there are studies showing that. So, this leads to the next set of studies that I'm just going to quickly present. So, and this is conceived within this framework that several people in my lab helped me develop, called Culture as a Binder for Language Acquisition. So it's not just the properties of language, like Vladimir pointed out with the brain. The brain is part of culture and culture is part of the brain. Well, language is, rather than seeing it as different from culture, you could say that it's one of our most dominant expressions of culture, but it's also embedded in all these other things. So when you're speaking a language, if you're speaking it in just one culture, you'll be wearing the clothing of that culture. There's the music of the culture, obviously. There are faces, cultures, and languages often come with different ethnicities, dance, food, etc. And for a bilingual infant, but even a monolingual infant, this might be really important. And then, of course, in much of this, in speech itself, in music, in dance, there is rhythm. So what this set of studies is looking at is several different, features that might help culture be a binder. So if you compare minimally different sounds with two visually different things, and that helps pull them apart, or which sounds come from Chinese and which sounds come from English. Fa va is not used in any Chinese language, and sa cha, I can't even pronounce it right, maybe sha is not used in English. So you've got the pairing, the simple associative learning. You've got probably some privileged relations biologically that we very quickly as infants map language onto ethnicity. And then you also have this structural isomorphy, that certain aspects of the culture, like music, share some structural properties, including, as some musicologists will say, at least for some genres, the rhythmical properties of language and music. I'll have to talk to you more about this. So what we've been asking here is, does priming infants with the music of a language facilitate speech sound discrimination in that language? So the hypothesis is that if babies see somebody, if they experience the music of one language versus another, they'll get all those cultural cues that are associated with that language. And if they're a bilingual baby, that might differentially activate that language for them and get them better at detecting the properties. And so we're looking at speech sound discrimination because that's something I know how to do. So this first study, we have two studies. One, we're looking at English monolingual and English Chinese bilingual learning infants. And the other one, we're looking at English monolingual and Japanese monolingual and Japanese English learning infants. And basically what we're doing is we first show them somebody singing. So there's a Mandarin singer, a Cantonese singer, and an English singer, a traditional song, so from about 40 years ago, that has the rhythmical properties that go with the language and that it's not likely one that the kids have heard. And then we're testing them on their ability to discriminate like a Chinese-specific distinction, sha, or English-specific distinction, fa, va. Are you with me, or is this too detailed? Okay, you're with me. Okay. And then we're just starting doing the same thing in Japanese. So very quickly, I will show you, and this is like, showing you guys somebody singing. I'm very vulnerable right now. This first person has no training, and she's singing, she has a little bit of training in a Chinese language. So I'll stop there, but she the rhythm of Chinese languages is very simple. The syllable structure is very simple. It's mostly consonant vowel. When syllables do close, they close with like an in or an ing, and so it's very simple. And the traditional melodies, and this is a traditional children's song, have that same simple rhythm. I probably don't need to play it again for this group. You picked that up. I'll just... Okay, you saw her. And then this is our English singer for the Japanese English study. Let me just show you. I couldn't show you the other one. She just didn't sing well enough. Come on.
If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today, you'd better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was will gather there.
So what you see there, and I think that wasn't actually synchronizing well in the video, but you hear the rhythm is much more complex. They also have differences in ethnicity in the face. There's also the language there. We can try to take these all apart. But so they either see somebody singing in a Chinese or an English language, and then we test them on discrimination. Sorry. And so far, we're like a little more than halfway done with the English monolingual, English-Chinese bilingual study. And basically what you can see is when it's even affecting the monolinguals, they do better at discriminating fa-va, which is very difficult, if they're primed with English than if they're doing discrimination of fa-va as well when they're primed with Chinese, but they're showing the difference in looking time that you see when something is difficult. So they're looking more to non-alternating than alternating. Our Chinese-English bilinguals seem to be doing a better job at Chinese, period, so far, and they're more dominant in Chinese, the group we have so far. It's just small n so far. But you see they're showing a different pattern. So they're showing the pattern of this is a language I know well when they're primed with Chinese, and this is more difficult when they're primed with English. So we'll see how that ends up. But we are seeing a difference. And we still are just starting with the Japanese. So we do think this is a way to start asking about culture as a binder for language acquisition. We want to just focus in on the rhythm, and that's it. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank my collaborators, and I want to say that I hope it was okay that I got into the weeds of a few studies, yeah, I'm excited to be here. And I just want to highlight Anya here because she does have psychology of music graduate degree, and she's a wonderful collaborator, and now she's at University of Vienna. Okay.